Feeling some grief over all the years of being duped by Neo Advita and those teachings which denied the holiness of the body and the material world. It would have been better to have heard that you are not only your body. It would have been better to have heard the world is real, albeit impermanent. I don't know why I ever believed that I needed to forsake my life in favor of a higher state. A life of trauma made it easy for me to not trust my body and to give my power away. I feel no shame in this. I am healing. It's hard work, but I will not abandon myself again. I feel God is smiling big time over this. The greatest state, not experience, I know of is love. Maybe there is more. I cannot say. But I can say I have yet to come across anything in this love that speaks of levels and degrees and hierarchies. All and all is held so intimately and equally in this fathomless acceptance. I'm telling my body that I'm sorry for all the years of not the best of care, and I am laboring to build new body love habits. It's not so easy. I'm trying to breathe new life into all the areas of my life that have fallen into ruin as they were deemed of lesser importance. It's not so easy. I'm working on nourishing my relationships that dried up from lack of loving attention due to spiritual bypassing. I tell Mother Earth how sorry I am for all the ways I've walked upon her surface with little to no regard for her elemental and life-sustaining presence. She is forgiving, and we are healing this divide. As I am open to and deeply desirous of her lessons, they have been rich. Jesus was right when he said, the kingdom of heaven is spread out on the earth and men do not see it. It takes a different kind of seeing. It's work to come back from such delusion, but I'm incredibly thankful that this is happening.
Whew.
I'm so glad you brought this up back to me yesterday because I hadn't read it, and or a few days ago, and I read it again, and I read it. I didn't realize it was mine. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to meet this person. And I get down to the bottom of it, and I'm like, wait, I wrote this.
You know why? Maybe in some way where you're like, I don't think I wrote this, because it's so universal, and what you're saying is the voice of so many people. You're reading it as you, but you're also giving voice to a lot of people.
My deepest concern with coming on, and I was just sitting on the floor and just like really crying out to life, just to be open and to be human and to be vulnerable. I still have unresolved grief around this, and I'll have days where a lot of anger comes up around it, but I just didn't. I wanted to make sure as much as I could that whatever I spoke would, like I said, would be of benefit. If not, why speak it? That's my heart, because if I could in any way make this softer,
yes,
for someone else, I would spend the rest of my life doing it. Thank you for your work.
Thank you for speaking, because this encourages other people. So many people are wanting to talk about what they went through. They don't know how, they don't have the words. It's hard to even understand what it was. And so clarifying things where a lot of people are like, me too. Oh, I see that now. And then, of course, just having the courage to share it openly. It's transformative. You mentioned something in there, I think, about courage or bravery or towards the end. And I just think that it's such an important thing for people to hear, that re-embracing your humanity and the sacredness of selfhood is an act of courage rather than this act of weakness, that you weren't strong enough, or your weak egos pulled you back, when I think the easier thing for me and a lot of people is to throw ourselves away. The easier thing is to escape and bypass and say that things aren't real and they're illusions. But there's just so much pressure, I think, in those worlds to say you have to keep going, and if you don't, all these negative things that means about you. So just to hear people in your position who have made that courageous act to be like, something's not right here, this is not complete, and your heart bringing you back.
Absolutely. It's a form of personal midwifery.
Yeah.
We really have to midwife ourselves. I can speak more about it now without it feeling so. There's still a lot of pain around it.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot of sadness around it because of the difficulty of having thrown off ordinary life to such a degree,
Mm-hmm.
to have disassociated from my body to such a degree, and then to be faced with, wow, all of this is that too.
Yeah.
And to realize that God or life, so to speak, is absolutely in love with this flesh,
Yeah.
you know, in love with this body, in love with this person called Lila, in
Yeah.
love with her narratives, in love with her stories, all those things that I was taught. Oh, that's just a story. That's just your mind. And now I'm in this phase where it's a reclamation.
Yeah.
Like I'm having to go back, and some of it's incredibly joyful, some of it's incredibly painful, and then it's joyful.
Yeah.
But to go back and, like, I've had this strong desire to tell my story the last week, and you're the second person that reached out to me, because this lady reached out to me because, like, she found out I was a mom of 8,
Yes.
and she's interviewing mothers. And so I'm like, wow, I want to tell my story. And then, like, you reached out, and these stories are sacred.
Yeah.
They're important. They want to be honored. They want to be heard. They want to be told. And I think life is in love with our stories.
Wow.
Exact opposite of what I had gotten into, which kind of was a platform for a while to escape my body, because that's where all the pain and the tragedy is held in our bodies. So I can understand wanting to climb the stairway to heaven when the basement's so full of scary shit. I get it. I don't want to judge anybody for that. I really do get it. But the higher you climb up, the more difficult it is to descend back down.
Especially if you've cut off the rungs beneath you, right?
That's what I'm talking about.
That's the real thing, huh?
That's really good too. I love that, Jessica, because it's the whole thing about dissension is most of us don't even have the rungs. We don't have the structures in place, because we totally destroy, either we didn't have them to begin with, or we totally destroyed them in climbing the stairway to heaven. And now we have to come back and create all these psychological structures, so to speak, so we can make this gracious and gentle descent back into our bodies and our psyches and all the dark corners of our lives and our minds. And such a labor of love.
Yes.
It's the laboratory of love. That basement is the laboratory of love.
I love the way that you're describing it, but it does, like, that ascending the ladder in a model of either or. Transcending is like transcending and excluding. So it's, as you climb, you cut off the rung beneath you, because that's what I was being taught. It was like, there is no going back, right? It's, you're burning all your bridges because you're supposed to. You're burning all that down forever. I just really empathize with you, and that dissension process, or return path, or some people say like coming down the mountain, but you describe it as gracious, and it seems like a heart opening happened for you that's somehow helped you in that.
Yes, that's beautiful, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly when it started to take on the flavor of what I'm describing right now. I guess it was about 4 or 5 months ago. I had a massive heart opening, like just out of the blue. And I'm crying and crying, and tears are just flowing. And it was a huge learning curve for me, first of all, that unbounded love does not obliterate the boundaries of an autonomous, unique expression of a person. And that was huge. That was really huge to see that. And then it started to dissipate, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is it like just gone for good? But it's not. I'm in this process of integration, and some of it's very painful to integrate.
Yeah. I was thinking when you use the word like searing along with love, I've said this word ecstatic. And I think maybe another word would be useful there, but it's like there's that love brings pain, but it's doing it from a place of kindness.
Yes.
I think it can be hard to see it that way sometimes, but it seems like you're taking it as like a revelation that's a gift and showing you.
I love that word extagony because I often use, thank you so much. And I will probably use it somewhere.
Me
And
too.
thank you, because it is a dance between agony and ecstasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and I'm like, how can something that feels so good hurt so much? We have these romanticized ideas about love, and romantic love is beautiful. And I think it's one of the many ways this love can express itself. But at its core, it's nothing like roses and chocolates. And yet it doesn't exclude roses and chocolate.
There,
You
there.
know?
I feel like the love that we're talking about is a love that's not, it's not there to get rid of darkness or even necessarily to get rid of the pain. And that's what feels to be the big difference on, I think that you and I've had on our paths where in a lot of spirituality and the non-dual spirituality that Neo Advita stuff that we come from, the love that's talked about seems to be this exclusionary love where it's once we get rid of this and this, or see through that and those things are out of the way, now the big love is there. Now that universal, pure, impersonal, boundless love is there. Yet it comes as a result of clearing away all of these things that are not included in that love.
Yes, beautiful. I love the way you expressed that. And I actually never got to the point that I experienced that kind of love. I experienced this kind of love through the, I'll call it the backdoor approach, because I experienced this opening through the entrance and opening to the muck and the mud and the grief and the sadness and the joys of just my human experience. And that's what was really difficult for me, because my trajectory was, and the trajectory is a real thing. It's an energetic current that our awareness gets caught up in. People hear things like this and they're like, oh, you can just change your mind and you can just turn and go. It's not like that at all.
Yeah.
So to be with this, to just really open to this, and somehow God is going to be in the, not just in the middle of this mess, but God is going to
be this.
be this mess too.
Yes.
It's a huge shift when you start to recognize that we don't have to get rid of anything.
Yeah.
It is the acceptance, and you can't accept that stuff through a divided mind, so to speak, because it's always going to be, God would certainly accept this, but certainly this.
Right. Or this is holy and that's not holy, or that's a duality that we need to escape. That's not the absolute. Or but what you're describing to me, and I don't think we talked about this before, like when we first started talking, I feel like you were describing like this feeling of shock and like a grief that came with it, of like all of these things that I've been rejecting in the name of the divine, the absolute, or the transcendent, whatever. All of this was already that I know that I have had these moments where I just cry because I'm like, this time I didn't get to see you. Like to look at my water bottle and be like, oh, I used to say this is just an illusion. This is really just emptiness. And looking at it now where it's, but you're God too, or this is that, but it's in all of it's that. And so not being able to see, let's say, like the physicality of spirit or the humanity of the ground or whatever it is. And that's, I think, more where an integration can come, because I don't know, and I'm totally going off on tangents here, and we should just please feel free to go back and whatever.
It's cool. And do you feel like too that when we say all of this is that, there's nothing that isn't that. And when you start to really sense that, you wouldn't even want to hurt an ego. I was orienting myself for this meeting, and I was just like sitting on the floor, and whatever I say, I want it to be of benefit to the whole.
Sure.
Because I am a part of the whole. That whole is myself. And so it's just a way of speaking to myself in all these different forms.
I think we're having the similar experience where when you say that you're meeting yourself, you're not negating that they're also their own individual, where it's like you see that we're all that, but we're also us, like that we're unique manifestations of being, whether it's divine or it's oneness or whatever.
2 or 3 weeks ago, I'm just like sitting here one night, and I don't know what I was doing, and I remember just going, oh my goodness, this incredible, profound process, this incredible, profound awakening is happening to a person here.
Exactly.
And she and love and life get to go through this together. I'm not obliterated.
Exactly.
At all.
Totally different.
Celebration. And if I'm not obliterated, neither are you, and neither are you, and you. It's just wonderful.
Right. See now, right? Like all that joy and delight that comes up, that it's like, nobody has to disappear. It's coming to the sanctity of life, I feel, and that there's sacred worth in human existence. And just to go back to some of the stuff that we went through in like the anti-human non-dual spirituality, that like to really look at how deeply anti-human it was, it's a bit heart-wrenching. And so I feel like that's something that you and I connected over a lot, was just like this grief.
Yeah.
But it was mixed with that love of, I'm grieving, but I'm so grateful that I see it now.
And if anything, it makes me, because of the extreme. Whenever something goes to the extreme, when the balance comes in, there's even greater joy and greater celebration with it. And so for the first time, because of having denied my own human existence as invalidated in the arms and eyes and of love itself or life itself, it's so much more of a celebration, where I'm like, wow, I belong here.
Yes.
I deserve to be here, to breathe, to take up space. I am home on planet Earth. Yes. I am nurtured by Mother Earth herself.
That's huge for me too, is there is this line that always I heard in non-dual spirituality that was like, I'm in it, but I'm not of it. And like, I got to this point where I'm like, I'm in it and I'm of it because I am it, and I belong to it because I'm a part of it, and I'm inextricable from it. And we can detach from that and disidentify with being of it, because of, as far as I know, means that I'm a part of it and I belong to it. And like, I'm bound to the world and to the universe because I am it, and to you and everyone. But now it's not in a bad way. And sometimes, obviously, like feeling bound to things is awful at times, but this is a different type of bondage, and this is something much different. And now I'm going off on a tangent, but just what you were saying of feeling at home here, more of what I want my path to be about. Whereas the self and world denying spirituality is escapist, this real sort of like revolt against, like, I don't want to be here, and I don't want to be somebody who belongs in this fucked up delusional humanity. Like I
Isn't
I don't,
really,
this is not my home. I don't want to be here. Right. That's really changed. It's, I do want to be a part of it. I want to be part of it in a new way,
yes.
but I am a part of it. So let's see, how can I be the best part of it that I could be?
Exactly. I was talking to a friend of mine last week, and we were talking about this very thing. And he brought up, like, is it in Buddhism, where they talk about the wheel of life, like getting off of, yeah. And then I'm like, wow, but spirit just wants to wrap itself up in all of this flesh and weave itself as life, as all of it. And from that space, that really grounded in humanity's space, evolve itself within that. And I think that's heaven on earth. We're afraid of what we are in these human forms on this planet Earth.
Yeah. It's much harder to see our own sacredness than the sacredness in something other than or beyond. But I was going to say that when you say heaven on earth, what I tell myself, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is that, like, when you say heaven, I don't feel like you're talking about the utopian notion of heaven, where heaven means everything's perfect and there's no
Yeah.
this is a different type of heaven, the shit and the beauty and all of it. So it's, yeah, I'm just thinking about how we both came from purity type of paradigms of, we need to, like, pain and suffering and all of it is impure, and desire in the body and all of that, that, like, somehow heaven is, again, once you purify all of the impure. And I guess I don't think I ever really knew, like, how you first got to self-negating non-duality. I don't know what was, like, the first sort of gateway for you into that world.
The Christian paradigm, which didn't, what crumbled was something that got built on top of a really deep heart connection with Jesus. When I was 20, I fell so in love with Jesus, I was annoying.
You were a
And
Jesus freak.
I was a Jesus freak in the best possible
I
way.
wish I knew you then. You must have been so cute.
That Jesus freak turned into anyway, more of a fundamentalist. So, that's where the mind took off with that. But there was always just this aliveness and connection in my heart. And anywhere, and I started going to this non-denominational charismatic church, and I was just like there all the time, and I'm studying. I'm doing in religion the same thing everybody in spirituality is doing now. They're reading all the top books. They're, hunting down all the great teachers and sitting and talking. It's the same thing it was for me. Looking for God in all the wrong places. Looking for God in too many faces. That song, Looking for Love. And so it got to be, let's say, the kind of juiciness of that heart connection with this Christ energy, this Christ transmission, began to just get dulled out as I got more into studying the scriptures and taking them literally. And then this massive split, which was already in the mind, but it actually, the cavern separating it just became deeper and deeper through this belief system.
Yes.
Where there is, in my mind, there is a literal heaven. I couldn't tell you where it was. There's a literal hell. I couldn't tell you where it was. And I knew who was going and who wasn't. And of course, I wasn't going. And anybody that believed like me was going.
Right.
And since I didn't want them to go to hell, not that I really loved them, I just thought it was my duty to make sure they didn't go there.
Yeah.
So then I would try to convert them.
The evangelism aspect of it.
The evangelistic energy is like huge. You have your evangelistic groups and you're going out on the streets and all this kind of stuff. And I thought it was the strangest thing, because I lived in a college town, and the college town was really partying at night. And I had my years of that too. It was wonderful. It was like some of the best years of my life, actually, being a dancing queen in the bars.
Yeah.
And that was actually, when I look back, that was actually more life affirming to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that now. And little by little, just The divide in my mind was just, it was just horrendous. And then I don't know what happened. And my perfectly formulated, I got it all figured out belief system just started to crumble. And I would go to sleep at night and wake up, and chunks of it would be gone. And anybody who knows anything about the psyche,
Yeah.
knows that when belief structures in the psyche get pulled out, it creates a lot of chaos.
Sure.
And that can container. It's very confusing, very disorienting. So I went through a really long period of extreme fear.
Yeah.
And anxiety. I was really angry at God. And I said things like, do you know how long it took me to put together this belief system? Like, I don't even have enough years. I would cry. I remember crying and saying this. I don't have enough years left on this planet to recreate a new one. Because in my mind, I thought, oh, wow, I'm turning into, my belief system is like a piece of Swiss cheese.
Yeah.
And the holes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'm not having anything solid to stand on.
Right.
And so it was terrifying. But in the middle of all of that, we had a church that met in our home. So we left the quote organized church. Basically, it was just a geographical relocation with a little bit more liberties. We left the building of hundreds and hundreds of hundreds, and we met in our home with other families. And then all of this change starts to happen in me, and I don't see the Bible verses the same anymore. My whole perceiving lens has altered because these belief structures have just been ripped out of my psyche.
Right.
And I'm sharing how verses are to me and how they've come alive. And I'm really starting to see that there is no punishing and rewarding God, that man had actually made that up, and that it didn't exist anywhere outside of a belief system.
Right.
In order to maybe make sense of a world, or conditions and circumstances that no one had an answer for. And then the people that met with us were saying things like, wow, you have a really interesting understanding of scripture. It's strange. And, and I started, just started to not feel good.
Yeah.
And it was of the mindset where the men were the head of their homes. So the men in my home group were talking to my husband, who's my ex-husband now, and telling him that he needs to get me in line. That was just the funniest thing ever, because he never got me in line, and nor did I ever buy into that. And they called a meeting and get me in line, or this whole thing's over. And I'm like, I'll see you guys later. So then all of that fell apart.
Burn the witch. That's kidding.
Yes, burn the witch, so to speak. But so that fell apart. And then I can't stay in the marriage anymore. And I have 8 children. And my youngest one is 8 at the time, and I just couldn't stay anymore. And I was still one of those women who didn't have her own money. I was a really great mom. I loved, keeping a home. I loved homeschooling my children. I loved validating their little individual personhoods and making sure they had every opportunity to be the people they were meant to be, and totally gave myself for the benefit of the whole. And I have no regrets about that. Like my children are home for me. Yeah. Wherever they are, I'm home. It could be in a swamp. It wouldn't make any difference. So I feel fortunate to be on this planet Earth and have those 8 children that came out of my womb. It's the greatest service I could have done to mankind. And so I ended up, it was a long, hard, difficult story, but full of fear and terror. And I ended up leaving. And right before I left, and right before the home church thing fell apart, as I was being undone from this very fundamentalist belief structure I had built as a container for safety for myself, I came across this book by Joel Goldsmith called A Spiritual Interpretation of Scripture.
Huh.
And I had started, this is back before we have all this fancy stuff like Facebook now. These were like Yahoo groups.
Oh.
Where, so I was on this, it sounds ancient.
Like that.
I was on this particular Yahoo group called Kicking Over Sacred Cows. And I'm still really good friends with one woman who was in that with me all those years ago. And little by little, I'm just questioning things, and just, I didn't know it at the time, but I would say that the light of love was really lighting up my mind and my body and my intellect at that time. And that's where just the shattering of all this illusory belief system was coming from. And so I started reading Joel Goldsmith, and of course Joel Goldsmith led me to Robert Adams. Real non-dual, real not life affirming.
Is he Christian?
No, he was supposedly a student of Ramana Maharshi, but removed. And so it was very much dishonoring of life. And I had gotten so deeply into that, A Course in Miracles, Nisargadatta's early writings. There's a whole group of them, Rupert Spira, the young Jeff Foster.
Yeah.
Gosh, any name that was a thing in either Neo Advita or non-dual, yeah. I am chewing on this 24/7. Because see, I'm a lover of truth.
What's that?
I've always been a lover of truth.
And if it's not this, then what is it?
And if it's not this, then what? Yes, exactly. So whatever I did, I do it with my whole being. So if I'm going in a so-called wrong direction, I don't think there is one, but whatever direction that I move in, I just become it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did with this. Nothing had changed in the makeup of this person.
Right. What would you say attracted you to, because your first, it sounds like, experiences of God and that were very loving and life affirming. So what do you think it was that made you attracted to the more self and world denigrating type?
Authority, primal early development wounding, severe wounding from being raised in a home with an alcoholic parent, and extreme poverty. I grew up here in America, third world poverty.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. And I did. And I was never safe. I suffered a lot of sexual abuse. I didn't have loving, caring parents. The home was extremely dysfunctional and violent, and I suffered a lot of emotional abuse and physical abuse. So when I would meet these so-called men, which was the whole reason I married the person that I married to begin with, and which I think is so beautiful now. This is part of the reclamation of my story.
Yeah.
Is that I used to be like just so angry about what happened to me in my marriage. I had no sense of safety, belonging in the world, no sense of who I was, just like literally open and full of holes. And whatever anybody thought was good for me was good for me, and I trusted them.
So it was another set of authority figures. They're saying something radically different.
Yes.
That's maybe like intriguing and what is this? Oh, this is the opposite of what I heard. Yes. But did it come with that feeling of this is not religion, this is something else, this is something secular? Did it feel like you were like, it felt like a departure from religion, I'm guessing?
It definitely felt like a departure from religion, and in a sense it was.
Right.
But in another sense, which is the reclamation part, is I actually needed those people to hold a power for me that I had no container in myself to hold. I had no way to make sense of it. So when we talk about the integration of psychology and transpersonal psychology with spirituality, I think it's so crucial that they go together.
Don't you find that fascinating that you're saying that you didn't have a self structure and you were relying on no self teachers to hold that self-structure together. It's just, they're so nuanced.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
sure you couldn't have grasped that at the time. And I think that's happening for a lot of people with these types of teachings, that it's only later that you're like, oh my, like all these different things that factored into what drew you to it, what kept you there, what,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. And it was like that, the baby bird syndrome. You ever seen baby birds in a nest? They're just there like,
Exactly. Yeah, this is
like,
exactly how it
like,
feels.
give me love, give me something. I was a ghost of myself. God, talk about hungry ghosts. My basement was full of hungry ghosts, and now I have that understanding now, but I didn't have it then.
What was it like though with, because these teachers that you talked about are very much focused on helping you bring about an ego deconstruction or the end of selfhood. Did you have a new experiences with these teachings that, like, did you have, I know you already felt like you didn't have a very solid sense of self, but was there like an even bigger shattering of there is no self, or
Yeah,
nobody real? Was that an
yeah.
experience?
I would have these, I would sit with, and this actually happened like right around the time where I have this energy filled my spine, just out of nowhere. And I've been doing a lot of breathing and mantras, and like I'll go back and say, if I latch onto something, all of me latches onto it.
Yeah,
I don't
go
do
big
anything
or go home.
halfway. Go big or go home. So if I so-called sinned at the time, I sinned big. If you're not going to do it big, why waste your time?
Sure.
And I think that's the heart of love. Look at this world. If God's not doing it big, why do it at all? You know, right? So like father, like daughter kind of thing. That's a funny saying, but where were we? I lost my.
We were talking about, I had asked you the question of, once you sort of transition to this more kind of no self type of spirituality, I guess was curious about experiences that maybe it had of, like, because I think you talked a lot about having been erased in some ways, and
Yes.
was wondering to what extent it was like those teachings that were Nisargadatta and Ramana Maharshi, all these guys, right? They're teaching to the like essential non-existence of, you're not your body, you're not a person, you're just formless consciousness.
And I have this upper crown, like just like openings, and this really profound understanding that no one was here.
Yeah.
But wow, this is interesting. I'm actually just noticing this now. But as far as you can't embody that, to actually, whoa, wow, okay, hold on. To actually embody that, you have to move into denial of life. See, is when the heart opens, we open to all of this as us, and we embody it, and we relate to it as an extension of our own self. But when you have that waking up from, here's the power of a preposition right here. You can wake up from, and I am none of this.
Yeah. You
can wake up to, and you start to wake up to everything, inside, outside, and then you ultimately wake up as. Those are three powerful awakenings there. Neither one of them, I mean, they all have some degree of importance. My waking up from came with profound shards of understanding and insight as I would sit with Nisargadatta, or contemplating his words. And this is what I did 24/7. I was even removed from being really involved with my children for 2 or 3 years. I was there, but I was so absent. And that breaks my heart. Like, I can't get that back.
Yeah.
So that's still tender for me. And yet at the same time, I'm like, okay, it's my story.
Yeah.
And my story will have value for someone. That's the redeemable quality of any story, is it will touch someone.
Yes. And I was going to say, what you're sharing will touch a lot of people, because
Yeah.
I hear from a lot of parents that went through what you did.
And this waking up from, which is the negation.
Yeah.
I lost connection. I lost connection with my children. I lost connection with my life. I lost connection with my own sense of self, as shattered and broken and torn as it was.
Yeah.
It had gotten so severe, total, absolute dysfunction. And then to make that even worse, I ended up with this teacher, and he was the worst version of this I'd ever seen. He's telling the first thing I ever heard this guy say was on one of those YouTube talks or something, and I stumbled across it, and I heard him telling, this woman was asking him a question. She had 2 sons, and she was asking him a question about how to deal with your children and all this process. And he said, just put them in a bathtub and drown them. I'm not kidding you.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
And that didn't even turn me away. Now, the thing is, that was like 12 years ago, and she and I are so beautifully connected.
Wow.
And we went through war together. It was a very, very dark 3 years of my life with somebody that I consider has major psychological issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he's telling people, if the bills come in the mail, don't worry about it. Just throw them in the garbage. If they need you, they'll come and get you. He told me, like, stop spending all your time with these kids. Stop cleaning this house. Stop doing this. Leave that marriage. And I was already so dissociated.
Yeah.
And I was gullible. I'm a woman, and I have no sense of my own power, and I'm totally given all my power to this person, and I'm trusting what he says. And then it gets darker and it gets darker, and the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, not just with me and her, but with the whole group, it gets darker and darker. And then I realized that I'm starting to be the therapist to this person. And he's saying things like, you're the only sane one in this group. Why are you even here? And then I started to go, yeah, what the fuck am I here? At this time, I had this Kundalini resurgence, this really profound physical
life, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's this really profound physical manifestation. I'm dysfunctional again, but I'm dysfunctional with all of this energy because I'm a walking volcano. With the vibration, there was so much heat. I forgot how to sleep because it's continual and it's nonstop, and things are being shaped up and reoriented. And so it took me meeting another teacher, and I met through a mutual friend of mine, the Yahoo lady. She told me about this teacher, and I read his book and reached out to him. He replied the very next day, and that started a whole new relationship. But it was never one where, because he said up front, I'm not here to be your guru. And I thought that was great, but it left me a little shaky too, because I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do? I'm an authority figure, people. Like, you don't know, like, my psychology is so wrecked, and I didn't have a father. Like, I needed a safe container in the relational field so I could put myself back together. And I didn't know any of this at the time either. This has all come the last 8 years of really deep work and understanding the importance of a healthy ego and how the ego's the chariot of love in the world. And I'm like, wow. And it was so easy to just negate it and discard it because I didn't really have any of that anyway. I was just so broken.
That it was easy enough already. It's already broken down, so just get rid of it.
Yeah.
You say that stuff a lot as well.
Yes.
And like, you have a leg up because you're already in shambles. So
yeah,
it's easier to just obliterate the rest.
and I think even today, I would say the most difficult work is recreating a healthy sense of self, because you have to face everything in yourself to do that.
Yes.
You have to reclaim, not negate it. You got to make love to it. You got to own that thing and get intimate and so friendly with it that it just naturally releases all of its secrets and all of its history.
Mm.
Which is, we know that's true because if we're in a relationship with another human being,
Yeah,
they are with us that way.
I completely relate to that. And also that process of, I know for me, it felt a lot like kind of being in like a bardo land, that interim period of,
Yeah.
can I be a person again? Who would that be? And then having this like beautiful realization of, I can create it. And, but
Yes.
being able to uncover and resuscitate the wonderful parts of myself that self-negating spirituality had really like buried alive,
Yes.
that it was what's still there that's essential to me that I don't want to lose. Like my sense of humor, that was looked down on because that's just the ego wanting to be funny, right? Or the curious girl in me where, oh, you just want more information. It's just your ego trying to get more information. So to resuscitate, I don't, because not really dead, almost buried alive parts.
Buried
And
alive.
then there were certain parts of myself that had fallen away that I think it was healthy for that to happen. But then that's not, and there wasn't enough of a new sense of self that feels grounded and at the helm. So I imagine that maybe you also went through that.
I'm still in it. I think it's the rest of my life. I've heard and I've had in those years where there's just like all this falling away. And then I have 2 or 3 years where there's just celestial for real, where there's just beautiful downloads and visits from gods and goddesses and poetry. And again, I'm dysfunctional because all these states have just been dysfunctional for me. And I was still, that's still removal from ordinary life. And even with it's interesting though now because even all of those states that I had to somehow to get back to ordinary life, to come back down the mountain, I'm realizing now that I haven't lost those. I'm actually a multidimensional being.
Yeah.
All of those, I'm this beautiful woman living an ordinary life. I'm a mother, and the ordinary life just starts to feel a little more extraordinary, actually. Because when you come down from the mountain, you're the mountain, you're the you coming down, and you are bringing your understanding, your light, and your radiance, and you are infusing your humanity with all of that. And if you just stay there, so you're disassociated from the other dimensions of yourself because none of it's real.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me was this whole thing of there was even this whole slogan of it's not real, it's not real. And I just remember hearing that all the time. And of course I'm repeating it. I'm a good little learner. I'm a great parrot.
Yeah.
No, let me get something halfway clear and I'll just spout it out to the world. It's all of this is real. Why is something not real? Because it's ever changing.
Yeah.
Why can't this be the real as changing, the real in flesh, the real in time?
Yes.
But coming back down the mountain, and I wouldn't even say I wasn't really like in that. I've heard you talk about being in that I'll call it a very dualistic non-dual state, because it's really not a non-dual state. It's a dissociative state. And I think it's important if you can integrate it. It's not like it doesn't have value. So I don't want to speak of that. But I wasn't able to, I wasn't able to, and maybe if Kundalini hadn't happened in my body, maybe I would still be climbing that mountain. I'm not sure.
It might be.
But love changed the direction that my feet were traveling.
Yeah. Yep.
So I almost feel like I got caught mid-mountain, where I had some of that kind of stuff, but before I got lost in it, I got, yes, something redirected my attention,
Right.
and
back to the valley,
back into my body.
Yeah.
And the body belongs in the valley. The body belongs feet planted on earth. The body belongs relational connection. It's tribal, it's earthy. So that was the redirection. And Kundalini saved me from that. When the embodiment began to happen, you're really just met with all the hungry ghost. And it's the most difficult work. And then the love comes in a really huge way, which actually makes all that work so much easier. I still have to do the work.
Yeah.
I'm still in tears. I'm still going, oh my God, somebody hold me, somebody help me through this. And sometimes the only light I have is extreme darkness.
And you're not trying to make it an illusion anymore.
I'm not trying to make it an illusion. Absolutely. They coexist. They're not two things. They exist one within the other. That's the journey now. This one of continual opening and opening and opening. And some days, and there are seasons where it's expansive and beautiful and integrative and it feels whole. And the beautiful thing now is when the phases of contraction come, to me, I see contraction as love narrowing back down on a part of itself that it hasn't quite brought into its own fold yet.
Like embracing it almost.
So now I see where my body would resist contraction because my mind was conditioned, unbounded, expanded, unbounded, expanded. And I'm like, who the hell wants contraction? And there was so much resistance in my body. Literally, I almost died twice from the pain of it.
Yeah.
I'm talking checkmating in the worst possible way. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. And that massive wall of resistance, that this can't be God enough.
Yeah, God enough.
It can't be God enough. So I still have to keep this at bay. Like,
in some way.
And the most recent massive shift, and it showed up as an extreme distaste for spiritual language.
Yeah.
I could not, I would rather stand on the street corner and talk to a drunk. They felt more alive and real to me. I could not stand the conversation anymore. I couldn't read the books. I couldn't listen to talks. I didn't want to hear any of that. I hated it. It was a violence in my system to throw it off. And then I lost a lot of interest in the Kundalini narrative.
Yeah.
That was a real big one for me, because I started to see that what I was doing with Kundalini is the same thing I was doing with Christianity.
Yeah.
And my whole life was viewed through this lens of Kundalini.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, the more identified you are with the map, the more you need other people to agree with your map. So then you're shunning a whole group of people, probably most of the world. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. These are phases that we go through.
Yeah.
Nobody should feel bad about being in this phase. Sometimes I knew I consciously needed, and I chose it because I knew it was part of restructuring a sense of self inside of me.
Yeah.
And when all of that started to fall away was when I started to feel this opening in my heart, and I started to have these like trickles of a love that I remembered from when I was 20 with Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's coming back in a much more integrative and profound way with all the understanding. Uh,
Mhm.
and I just began to fall in love with myself as I am. And I also realized at that time that I had become addicted. It was almost a subtle form of violence against myself,
Yeah.
where I became addicted to the belief that I had so much to heal before I could be loved.
Yeah.
So now I'm not the religious girl, I'm not so much the spiritual girl. Now I'm the one that needs to heal.
Yeah. Right.
To heal all of this,
Yeah.
because somehow I'll be more worthy of this love if I can show up as a healed version of myself.
Exactly.
That is such a subtle trap.
Another trap.
And when that fell away, and it still is falling away, then I started to realize in a more deep and more subtle and integrative way that I am already this wholeness
Hmm.
that is so big and already so whole that it holds all my broken parts beautifully.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly. Yes, that it's a wholeness that includes the brokenness.
yeah, it's an expansion so unbounded. It's in love with my contractions.
And you know what contractions bring? Life.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, they do, right? Being
But
a
a
mom that's delivered 9
woman,
children.
a woman would know, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, and that was another crucial phase, and where just being not just the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah.
Now I'm in this thing where it's just super important for me to be a woman,
Hmm.
to know myself as a woman. What does this really mean? Not as a woman who's a seeker, not as a woman who has a lover, not as a woman through a masculine, a man's eyes, but what does it really mean for me to be a woman here on planet Earth?
Yes. And embody the feminine.
And yes, absolutely.
Just what you were saying about like the personal midwifing, I just think that's such a profound part of it, as coming from these self-negating paths, where it's like for people to also recognize that. I think that there's so much devastation around, I've lost myself, I've ruined myself, I can't get it back, where it's like there can be this really incredible, profound opportunity to give birth to a new, that it can be repurposed into, okay, this wasn't a permanent sort of ego death, but this was a very extreme way of, let's say, tearing down the house. But now I can rebuild from a different mindset and a more conscious creation.
Absolutely. And every moment we're willing to befriend a contracted place in us, we've at that point we've given birth.
Wow, isn't that, yeah. So when you,
Yeah,
if you don't accept and turn towards those contractions, you're aborting the you're aborting mission of
you're,
creation,
you're
right?
aborting your own life source. You are aborting your own essence, your own life.
Exactly, yeah.
We have birth doulas and we have death doulas. I consider myself a life doula
Hmm.
because between birth and death, there's life.
Yeah, and
And
birth is painful, right?
yes,
No one
absolutely.
knows, but it's
Yes.
worth it.
Oh, yeah.
You do, one thing I think, which is so perfect for this. It was a conversation with our dear friend Kate, and she sent me this quote, and I had thought about it earlier with something that you said. I don't know who it is, but it says, "The man throwing away his shoes as if to enter heaven, and finding himself astonished, opened at last, fallen in love with the solid ground."
Wow. So this work continues, and people can find me on Facebook, but I will be having a website. Um,
Great.
in the next couple of weeks, should be up next 2 to 3 weeks, where I will be sharing these types of things. and offering support for people who are attempting to bridge the divide, and come back home and home all of their life and home all of the aspects of their psyche and their bodies and their relationships and the world that they live in.